This video is all about love. I have put together a group of tutorials that have one thing in common, and that is hearts. These will be perfect projects for Valentine's Day, for bridal showers, or anytime you want to share the love. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how easy it is to whip up cute little gift bags for Valentine's Day with a clear heart window that we're going to make out of a page protector. You can use scraps of fabric of any kind of print. You're going to need something to tie it closed. I'm using a little bit of rickrack. You can use ribbon, embroidery floss, whatever you want. The little heart template, and you can get that for free. Just look for the link below. 2 pieces of fabric, 4.5 by 7 inches. And then you can either use pinking shears or a pinking rotary blade. We're going to need some clips, scissors to cut the page protector. Do not use your fabric scissors on that. Then we're going to need some fabric scissors and a little bit of Scotch tape. Let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut the heart out of one of our pieces of fabric. So we're going to fold that in half and just finger press it. We don't want it to stay folded, but we need to be able to cut our heart out. Then I'm going to fold the heart in half as well. I'm going to put the bottom point 1.5 inches up from the bottom, and the fold of the heart is on the fold of the fabric. Now you could pin that on there, but because it is so small, I usually don't, and hearts are forgiving. I just hold it with my thumb, and then you're going to take some fabric scissors and cut around that shape. Okay, now we have a heart cut out, and you have a heart left over for another project. I'll just put that to the side. Next, we need to work on our clear window. That's what's going to let the person receiving this gift see what's inside, candy or something else. I cut the page protector into about 3-inch strips. You don't have to be super precise because we are going to trim it after it's sewn on there. So it's about a 3-inch square. And you can place it over top of your heart just to make sure it's going all the way over those edges. And if you're going to be making a bunch of these, I would say just cut your page protector into as many of those squares as you can and have them at the ready. Just mass produce. Cut your fabrics, cut your hearts, cut your squares. Next, we are going to place the plastic square right on top of that fabric on the wrong side. This is a solid, so there's really no right or wrong. But if you do have a print, you want to tape the plastic on the wrong side of the fabric. And I usually just put 2 little pieces of tape just to hold that in place. Now we're going to take it to the sewing machine and stitch around the heart opening. I've tried this both ways, and I have found the easiest way to get it sewn pretty well around that heart is to put the plastic on the bottom and the fabric opening on the top. Then you're just going to want to sew pretty close, and I'm just going to sew about 1/8 of an inch from that edge. I'm also going to be using a small stitch length, 1.5, so that we're going to have our best results sewing on that curve. And just go slowly, and if you need to pick your presser foot up and move it to get the curve, then just keep doing that. I want to show you these 2 examples. This is the first one that I did, and I used a contrasting thread, but I didn't like how you could really see that it wasn't as perfectly straight around the edges of that heart. So now I use a coordinating thread, so it isn't as obvious. I'm not going to worry about it not being super precise because, again, this is just a quick gift bag with a window. It's not one that is going to be an heirloom, and I don't think anybody is going to really examine your stitching. If you want to try and be a lot more accurate, you go for it, but I'm going for quick. Now I'm just going to take scissors, not fabric scissors, just regular scissors, and I'm going to trim off some of this plastic. Probably isn't necessary, but I just feel like a little less of that plastic in there is going to make the bag more supple. Now we're going to put these right sides together, and I'm going to have the side with the window on top. I'm going to line it up on the markings of my board, and I'm going to put a little mark 1/2 inch down from the top. We only want to sew to 1/2 inch from the top since we're going to be using pinking shears to trim the top so that it's super quick. Now I'm just going to put a few clips. So we're going to sew the 2 sides and the bottom, making sure that we start and stop at those marks that we made 1/2 inch from the top. Can you believe it? We are almost done. Now I'm just going to use pinking shears or this pinking rotary cutter and trim all the way around all 4 sides. It's going to prevent large frays like this inside the candy bag, and then it's also going to make the top really cute and finished without having to do a lot of work. So let me show you how each of these works. These are just regular pinking shears, so it's going to give a triangular shape. I'm just going to cut straight across the top. If you haven't seen these before, these are my favorite. They're by Fiskars. They're really easy on your thumb. I think they're called Easy Action Pinking Shears, and I will have a link below the video if you want to get a pair of those. I do use these a lot when I'm clipping corners and other projects. But you can also get a rotary blade that is wavy. And so it does the same basic thing. But it's going to cut more of a wavy shape than the triangular shape, but it is going to prevent fraying. So what I do is I put my ruler down just over that stitch line because I want to make sure I don't slip and cut my stitching. And then just like a regular rotary blade, we're just going to cut. And it's getting a little bit dull to get a new one. So see, it's triangular there and wavy on this side. But the rotary cutter, especially when it's nice and sharp, mine's older, is so fast. You never want to leave all that fuzz on your mat because you don't want it to get into the grooves. That will make your mat last as long. Now we're going to turn it right side out and just try not to crumple the plastic too much. You want to do most of the turning from the fabric side that doesn't have the plastic because it will wrinkle a teeny bit. See, it gets some little bends, but nobody is going to notice it when they're looking through that window at whatever is inside. So let me know in the comments what you would put in a little gift bag like this. I am going to grab these little fun-size candies. 6 fit in there really nicely. The reason this heart has to be down and not really centered is because you need to have room to pinch this and tie it shut and still have the heart shape, because if it was down too low, it would start to warp the heart window. I cut about 8 inches of rickrack, and I'm just going to tie that. You could just do a single or a double knot. Rickrack doesn't tie in a bow very well. If you want a bow, I would recommend using ribbon of some sort. Then I'm just going to take my scissors, trim those ends a little bit, and voila. It's done. You can do these in 10 minutes or less once you get started. And if you wanted to do a bunch, as I said, you can just mass produce, cut all your fabrics, cut all of your plastic squares, cut your rickrack, and just get sewing. So I hope this is a fun activity or little gift bag for you to make for Valentine's Day. I would love to know who you're going to give these to, how you're going to use them. Or is it going to be for a school party, for coworkers, for kids, grandkids? Let me know in the comments. I love to know how people use different projects that I post. And be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss a thing. Who's feeling lucky? Would you love to get rid of your fabric scraps and make these super cute fabric fortune cookies? Because I'm going to show you how easy they are to do. And I'm going to show you 4 different methods depending on exactly how long you want to spend on this and what materials you have in your stash that you want out and doing something fun. So when I showed this to my husband, he said, "But why are you making fortune cookies out of fabric? You can't eat that." And I said, number 1, because I can. Number 2, because I want to. And there's no more reasons needed than that, right? And they're eco-friendly. This is what I tell them. They fold really flat. You can save them, use them next year. The people can use them next year. They could be really cute for place cards too. Say you're having a Chinese New Year party or a Valentine's Day dinner. You could make a longer fortune and have the people's names sticking out. Put that on the plate. How cute would that be? Okay, enough of my ideas. Let's get into it. Now, let's quickly go over materials. You can make these little fortune cookies with lots of scraps of materials that you have at home. And that's why I'm going to show you a few different methods. Some are a little bit easier than others. Some, it just depends what you have in your stash and what you want to use and get rid of. So you're going to need 5-inch squares of fabric or felt or combination for the smaller ones. For the bigger one that I use for money, 6.5 inch. Then you're going to need some way to draw a circle. I use this bowl, which happens to be just under 5 inches. So I'll show you how I'm going to use that on these pre-cuts. I'm also going to be using my circle ruler by Lori Holt for the 6-inch. But again, just grab what you have. If you have a bowl that's a little more than 6 inches, make your squares a little bit bigger. You just want your fabric to be slightly bigger than whatever you're going to be tracing. Then to give them stability, you can use fabric and felt, or you can use 2 kinds of fabric. But then to give it that stability, you're going to need to use something. So I tested a couple things. This one has a Pellon interfacing, and I used the Shapeflex SF191. And I really like that because it gives it the stability and it's super thin too. So it turns really nicely, it gives you that nice shape. But if you don't have that kind of material sitting around, grab some fusible fleece. Most people have that. We're going to work with what you have. I definitely recommend pinking shears.
a heat erasable pen. You could use a regular pen. I just always have these, so I use that. Seam ripper of your choice, a ruler, rotary cutter, some pins. And because these projects are small, I'm going to be using my Cricut Easy Press Mini instead of a big iron. I find it easier to see what I'm doing, and I'll show you this when we get to that step. And you know what? Let's let vanity set in, and I'm gonna admit, I don't melt my nail polish as much with this as I do with my big iron when I'm working on small projects. So let's get started. The first one we're going to do is going to be the simplest. We are going to take one piece of fabric and one piece of felt, the wrong side of the fabric onto the felt, because there's really not a wrong side to felt. And we are going to trace a circle. A lot of people tell you to cut circles and sew them together. And I'm like, do we really need that step? Because after you sew them, you're going to have to cut again with the pinking shears. So I decided, let's use our time wisely. Let's sew and only cut once. Instead of cutting 2 circles, sewing them, and then trimming the edges, we're just going to sew and trim the edges. So for this one, the outside of the fortune cookie is going to be a zigzag cut. This is your fastest one. You're basically going to sew around it, trim, sew a little stitch line, and you're done. Our next set is going to be made with the same materials, one pre-cut or 5-inch square, and a piece of felt. But this time I'm going to put the fabric right side down on the felt, and we're going to trace that again. This one is different because we are going to sew and then we are going to flip it, press it, and top stitch so that the fortune cookie has a smooth edge like actual fortune cookies do. This one is basically the same materials as this, but we have turned the fabric this way. We're going to sew a 1/4 inch inside that circle. Our next two are basically the same. We're just going to have different innards, different material to stiffen it and give it the shape that it needs. So this set, we're going to put right sides together. This one's a pre-cut. This is just cut from a scrap. That's why that has straight edges. And I have already ironed on the Shape Flex from Pellon, which is a pretty lightweight interfacing. Again, I'm going to take my bowl and I'm going to draw that circle. And then I'm going to put 2 little pins in there. You could do 2 or 3. I find 2 works fine. And we're going to sew with about a 1/4 inch to the inside of that line. This one, again, a scrap pre-cut and a scrap piece of fabric, right sides together. This one has fusible fleece on the back, and I'm going to have this side up just because this is bigger and I want to make sure my bowl stays on that pre-cut. And again, we're going to sew on the inside of that. When you're sewing curves and circles, and especially smaller ones, you want to use a pretty small stitch size so that you get a nice curve when you turn it right side out. What helps with a good smooth curve is not only how well you clip that fabric to bend so that it can form that curve, but also how many little spots there are on the curve that are sewn. So I usually sew something like this with a 1.9 or a 2.0 stitch. So this one is the big one. And just like with the others, I put the right side of the fabric down on felt and drew my circle. Now, because I cut this a little bit bigger, and you can do this with these smaller ones too, but because my scraps were a bit bigger than the circle, and I have at least a 1/4 inch all the way around, this one I'm going to sew right on the line and then trim. So whether you sew on the line or inside the line just depends on how big your fabric is and how big your bowl is. Like had I found a little bit smaller bowl for the pre-cuts, I could have done that as well. So like I said, this is a use what you have and make it work kind of a project. Now it is time to use our pinking shears. We are just going to trim all the way around our circles, all of them. And this is instead of clipping to get these curves. Just make sure that you do not clip your stitching. And you also want to leave maybe 2 inches not trimmed close. So see how I did that? It's close here, and then this one is a little bit bigger. That's where we're going to pull a few stitches and turn this right side out. And we need to make sure that we have enough fabric that we can press that under and stitch that closed. So looking at these different methods, what do you think your preference will be? Felt and fabric, or get rid of more fabric scraps by doing 2 fabrics and something on the inside to give it shape and body? Let me know in the comments. This is the one I told you was going to be the easiest, and I wasn't lying. This is the outside, this is the inside. So we aren't going to have to flip it, we're not going to have to press it, we're not going to have top stitch. But this fortune cookie is going to have pinking shear edges. So you're just going to cut all the way around. No need to leave any kind of a tab. This would be a really fun project to do with kids, to do with scouting groups. Maybe they're learning to sew or earning a sewing badge. I assume those things still exist. It could be something that they make to give away when they're doing some charitable work. Now I'm going to show you how we're going to turn these. So we sewed all the way around. Previously, I had done a video where I did something circle and I left an opening, and somebody suggested, don't do that. Sew all the way around and then just pull stitches. So I was like, well, that's a novel idea. Let's give it a try. And I have to say I like it. So I just pull a couple stitches and then I get my seam ripper in there, and I love this thing. Look how it just sits on my finger. I know I talk about it every time I use it, but I still love it. You're just going to push that through. And what she said was, now you kind of have a guideline when you're going to be turning it in where the stitches were. It kind of affects the fabric. So if you need to pull it a little further than your tab, you can, but you want to try and make your tab about the amount of space to get this turned right side out. And then I just run my finger right along that edge and see how nice and curved that is, because we did the small stitches and we did the pinking shear clips, so that that fabric is able to lay into that curve so nicely. Now I've heated up my Cricut mini press and we're gonna get this done. So I kind of push that down so that the edges are good. And now we just have to deal with this section. And I usually do it one side at a time and get it as curved as possible. So I press that top part and then I'm pressing around the seam. Now I'm going to tuck this tab under, and I don't know if you saw how I crimped that a little bit, kind of folded it a little bit, so that it would make a better curve. Okay, so I'm gonna press that. Oh, it's hot. You can even see the color difference, how hot it is. So this is a good time to grab a quilter's clapper or a tailor's clapper, and it absorbs that heat. So now the heat's here and not on my fingers. Now this will be top stitched. So now we're going to do that for the rest of the fortune cookies. You can leave white in your machine and then the stitching will really show when you top stitch around here, or you can change your threads. So I've decided to go with red on the top and pink on the bottom. I am going to do my little pull the bobbin through the fabric trick. So if you don't know this already, put your foot down, hold this thread, put your needle down, and give it a little pull, and that will pull that bobbin thread up top. Then if you take both of these threads, pull them away, and when you start to sew, neither of them are going to get dragged down underneath to make what I like to call a bird's nest. And then just either knot or go forward and back a little bit, and then we're going to top stitch all the way around. And again, you want to top stitch with a pretty small stitch so that it gives you a nice curve. All right, back to our pressing mat. We have all of our circles sewn. So here's the goal. We're going to be folding them in half with the inside of the fortune cookie showing. So right sides together. Then we're going to be marking with a pencil or a pen, or I will of course be using my trusty heat erasable pen for exactly where we want that line to be. Then once that's done, you're done. All you do is you flip this, kind of push out that center so it doesn't look square, and then make it a little bit floppy. Now, question is, how much do you want your fortune cookie to be open? So you'll see these are two different variations. That one isn't open very much, and this one is open quite a bit more. That depends on how far you keep that line from the open edge of the semicircle once we fold it in half. So this one, we started in a whole inch from the edge. This one, I started a ½ inch. So you'll see it makes a big difference. This is also showing you why I'm going to tell you match both the top and the bottom. So the top thread and the bobbin's thread to your outside fabric, because if it strains and you see these threads, that really pops out and you would be much, much less noticeable if it was red. So now we're going to start with this one that was super easy. There was no turning, no pressing crazy curves. Oh my gosh, so fantastic. So we're going to fold this right side together. Then I'm going to line the flat edge up on my grid. I can also use my ruler. It's 4 3/4 inches. So you want to draw the line from the center. I want this one to be somewhere in between that ½ inch and that inch. So I'm going to measure down 3/4 of an inch from that outside edge, not from the stitching, the outside edge. And then I'm going to go to within ½ inch of the fold. I'm going to draw a line there. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the rest. So remember, you want the outside of your fortune cookie to be on top. When you fold that down, check the width. This one is 4.5. So because we turned this right side out, so turn it right side out, it's a little bit narrower. So we're going to go at that 2.25 mark. And we'll make this one small just so I have a variety to show you. So I did a 1/2 inch from that edge, a 1/2 inch from the fold. They look like little tacos. Okay, so this is the bigger one. It should be 6 inches. So we're going to do it at the 3 inch. And let's see what I did with this one. It's not quite open enough, I don't think, to my liking. And it is open 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to start my line 1 inch from that outer edge and go to a 1/2 inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch from the fold, because this one's bigger. I want both ends to be a little bit bigger. All right, I guess I really didn't need the pressing mat or the Cricut again. But if you wanted to press it, you could. Now, back to the sewing machine. Because the outsides of all of these fortune cookies have red in them, I'm going to be using red thread. And I have pulled up my bobbin thread like I showed you how to do before. And now because there's going to be some strain on this stitching, I'm going to go back and forth 3 times. So I'm just going to sew straight. And instead of going backwards, I'm going to really make sure I start and stop at the same place. So I'm going to lift my foot, turn the whole thing. I'm going to cut that thread so it doesn't get snarled up on top. And then I'm going to stitch to where I started. And then I'm going to do that one more time. Doing it this way is much easier and it's neater because you're going to get your threads better on the same spot in that long distance than if you were to have gone forward and then hit your back button and gone back. I tried it both ways and I really, really prefer lifting and twisting each time. So let's just get these all sewn together. We are in the final stretch. All we need to do is flip our fortune cookies and if you want to, put little fortunes in them. The stitching is here. You're going to put your finger in the center, open that up, and then pull these sides together. So the stitch line's there. And then you're just going to move it until it is sitting the way you want it to sit. And then this is the bigger one, just so you have variety, or this is a great size for money. Now, to put money in there, I just folded I don't know if I'm allowed to have money on video, so I'm gonna make sure you can't copy it. Okay, fold it in half again to make a long strip so it looks like paper. Then you just open this up a little bit, put your fortune or your money in there. I like to have it come out one side and not the other. That looks kind of cute. Or if you want it to be a big surprise, you can just fold it in half again and just tuck it in there. You kind of wrap it around like that, and it will help keep the shape of that fortune cookie as well. So for these little ones, you can write your own fortune cookie, but what I like to do is just this is off just a little memo pad, and I just do little strips about 1 inch wide. Just write whatever you want on there. I love you, Happy New Year. Or how about even like a little gift certificate? So good for ice cream. So that would be a fun way to give a little gift or an outing. So same way, you just kind of open that, wrap it around. I kind of make it flat with the bottom half. Put that back. So that one is a hidden one. And then again, if you don't want it hidden, just let it stick out. So let's review 4 different ways to make them. The quickest way is using fabric and felt and just pinking shears. So you just have to sew, flip. Second quickest way, fabric and felt again, but you're turning it right side out. These 2 are 2 pieces of fabric. This one has interfacing in it. This one has fusible fleece. That would just totally depend on what you have around that you have little scraps of that will work for this project. And then this one, I did felt. The original one, I also did felt. But you could do any of these methods with that too. So let me know in the comments which way you think you would go, if you're going to do this, who you're going to give them to. Give me all the details.
Let's make cute little fabric envelopes. They are the perfect size for gift cards, for cute little notes, carry a bunch of credit cards if you don't want to carry a big old wallet, whatever you want. Now, I love doing them where they have the shape of an envelope. You can also make them where it is straight across, which requires a teeny bit less cutting, but I think it's going to be worth it. I'm going to show you how to do it. And then also these stitch lines that really give that envelope feel. So let's first look at the supplies. The way I have designed these mini envelopes, you can make them out of 10-inch fabrics. So if you have 10-inch pre-cuts, you can use 2 of them and you can make 2 envelopes, or you can take 2 pieces of 5 inches by 10-inch fabric to make these. I just thought some of us have these hanging around, so I would make it so that you have something really efficient to use all of this fabric. Next, you're going to need the template, and this is a free template. If you are on my email list, you can go sign up. It'll automatically be emailed to you. If you're not on my email list, you can sign up. You'll need to click a double opt-in confirmation to make sure no one else is signing you up for my email list, and then you will get this. I'm going to be using a lightweight interfacing. I'm a big proponent of using what you have on hand, which is why I am using this featherweight interfacing. You can use whatever you have. You want it to give a little bit of body to your envelope, but you don't want it to be too stiff or too thick. Then you're going to need some pins, a pencil, something to help turn corners. I have this little turning tool. You could use a chopstick. You could use a pencil, whatever you want. I'm going to be using pinking shears to make the stamp. You can close it a few different ways. I'm going to show you how to use the cam snaps because they're fun and I love them. If you don't have them, don't want to get them, you can also just use a little scrap of Velcro to do that closure. You could also do a buttonhole and sew on a button. That's totally up to you. Then you need your basics: ruler, mat, rotary cutter. So let's get started. As I mentioned in the supplies section, you can make 2 envelopes out of 2 10-inch pre-cut pieces of fabric, or you can use scraps of fabric that are each 5 inches wide by 10 inches high. And if you are using directional fabric, you want it to be wide by high, and you need the direction going like this. I'll talk more about direction in a minute. I'm going to show you how to do it with the 10-inch. You'll figure out how to do it with the 5-inch. So you can put your interfacing on the back of either side. I usually put it on whatever fabric I'm going to use for the lining, just because if you don't adhere it perfectly and it gets a little bit wrinkled, you won't see it as much on the inside. But hopefully we're going to do a good job. Now I have this interfacing, and I cut it slightly smaller than 10 inches. Well, you'll see quite a bit smaller than 10 inches, but because this is going to be on the inside, I decided I did not want to run to the store and get more interfacing. I'm just going to piece this together, and no one is ever going to know. So I have put this face down. You can feel the bumps, or sometimes it's shiny depending on what product you're using. You want that next to the back of your fabric because that is what is going to fuse or stick to your fabric, and you do not want it to fuse to your iron. Then you're going to read the directions on the back of your product. And this one says to cover with a damp cloth. And I can't find my pressing cloth at the moment, so I'm just going to use 2 pieces of white fabric so I can still kind of see where my square is. And it says to dampen it. So this is just a mister bottle with water. They're really handy for ironing. You can get them on Amazon. I have my iron set to wool, and then it says to press down for 10 seconds to fuse this. So we're just going to hold this down and move across the fabric. Now I'm going to lift and press every time I move. I'm not going to slide the iron like I am ironing a shirt, because we don't want that interfacing to slide at all, because it really was close to the edge of the fabric, and I don't want to all of a sudden fuse it to my ironing board mat. So as you can guess, if you're working with fabric scraps, you would have just cut a piece of interfacing that was 5 inches by 10 inches and adhered it to the back of one of your fabrics. Because we're using these 10-inch squares, I just did it all at once. So I'm going to put these together. I'm just cutting them in half, so it really doesn't matter if they're right sides together because we're going to be moving them again. Grab my ruler, put that 5-inch line right along the edge. Make sure I have that nice and straight. Cut that in half. And now I have fabrics to make 2 envelopes from those 2 pieces. Well, 3, because I did it before 2. The next step is to cut with our template. And if you didn't get the free template, that's totally fine. You can just cut a point on one end, and then you can cut this shape, or you can do straight on the other end. Now, the tricky part, and the part that seems kind of weird, is if you're going to be using a directional fabric, the point needs to be at the bottom of the fabric, not at the top. See, so the direction's going this way, and we're going to put this down here. If it's just a random toss, it doesn't matter at all which end each of the templates goes on, but let me show you why. It is because when this becomes the outside or the lining, it's going to fold up like this and fold down like this to be the flap. So you want to make sure this flower on the flap is right side up and not upside down. So this is right side up, that's right side up, that's going to be upside down, but we're not going to worry about that. We're keeping this simple. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to place this template, and I'm just doing it on the fabric that does not have the interfacing. Grab a ruler, and I'm going to cut those two angles. So the point is cut, and now we need to do the bottom. You can either put it like this and pin it and cut all three of those lines, but what I like to do that's a little bit faster and easier is to fold this in half and just finger press that so it's flat. And then I fold my template in half and I put the fold on the fold and the point matching the bottom of the fabric. And then I'm just going to pin that and cut that by hand. Now, if you do have a cutting machine and you like to use your cutting machine for fabric, like a Cricut or a Scan and Cut Silhouette, there is an SVG file that you can get. It is with the written tutorial that you can get on Etsy, or they are free for anyone that is a member of my Sew with Tara Reid membership program, which you can try for $1. So I will put a link below this video so you can see that. You could jump in, grab this, grab that SVG file, see what else is in there and decide if that is for you. But there we go. Now we have that shape. So you can either cut that shape on a cutting machine or just quickly cut that by hand. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to put these right sides together, and the orientation doesn't matter because the inside is non-directional. And then I'm going to pin this. Now, a lot of people would cut both of them and then pin them together, but I don't, because you're going to have to do a lot of trimming after you sew these together, and it just saves a step. And then if things aren't matching absolutely perfectly because you've hand cut, it is not going to be a problem. I keep the pins pretty far in, so I'm not going to have to take them off as I'm sewing 1/4 inch from each side. Now, one other tip, and this is great if you're teaching somebody to sew, or I actually still do it all the time myself, is when you have these really deep points, I take a ruler and I draw with pencil where that 1/4 inch is. And I love this ruler because this blue line is exactly 1/4 inch. So it is really quick and easy to get that lined up. I get the inside of the blue lined up with the edge of the fabric. And so I just do a few of these lines where I know I'm going to need to pivot. And you could do this before you put the pins in. Might be a little bit easier, but I didn't. I forgot. So you don't have to do it all the way around, just where you're going to be pivoting your needle while you're sewing. This is really, really helpful when you're teaching people to sew, teaching kids to sew. It gives them a lot more confidence to know what they're doing, because even experienced sewers, sometimes when you get to weird points like this, you think you know where you need to turn, you lift your needle, you pivot, and you realize you're a little further than 1/4 inch. And so you have to put it down, go back again, which isn't a huge deal, but it can be a cause of stress for people who are new. So when I was teaching my niece, she really liked doing this when we did a project. So it takes, a minute or two to just draw those lines. And now we're going to take it to the sewing machine and we're going to sew all the way around with 1/4 inch. And we're going to leave a few inches open on this straight side down towards the point, but not too close because we want to be able to turn that nicely. So there and there. So now we're going to head to the sewing machine. Even though my machine will do a knot for me, whenever I am sewing at the beginning or at the end, when I know I'm going to be turning something right side out, I always go forward and backward just so that there's a little bit more stability to that section and it's not going to rip open when I'm turning my project. So now you'll see how easy that was, that I could just stop on that line, lift the foot, pivot or turn my fabric, and then I'm going to put the foot back down so that it is lined up with this edge, and we're going to keep on going. Now we're just going to remove these pins and we're going to trim and cut our corners. So I like to cut my corners nice and deep, especially these, because they are so tight. getting all of this fabric inside this little section is going to make it really hard to turn that corner well. I will say though, that you're not going to get a perfect point whatever you do. It's going to be a little bit bubbled, but that's okay because it's on the inside. So I clipped those points, and then I'm just going to cut right along where the white fabric is cut. So I'm going to cut that back off, or the lining. Then I'm going to cut those two corners. Now it's also important to trim here so that this is going to turn and give us a nice straight area on the envelope. So what I do is I take my scissors and I cut straight in to each of those pivot points. And then I just cut kind of at an angle on both sides, because that is going to ease up that fabric so that when we turn and press it, it's going to press really nicely. Then we're going to do the same thing up here. I do 2 cuts. Make sure you don't cut your stitching whenever you're cutting corner. So you'll see we had so many cuts to do with the corners that it was just as easy, actually easier and faster, to cut the rest of this lining off now instead of cutting it into the shape. So next we just need to turn this right side out, and you want to get it as right side out as possible with your fingers before you use a turning tool. So I always rub my finger along the seams, just kind of press that out as best I can. These bottom corners obviously are going to need a bit of help. I'm going to grab my turning tool, and again, if you don't have one, you can use the tip of a pen. Make sure the pen isn't open because you don't want to draw on your fabric. You could use a chopstick, something that has a point but isn't super pointy, because you don't want it to poke through, especially since we cut pretty close to those seams. If you really, even if I really jabbed this hard, I could poke this through, which would be a bummer. We'd be starting over. Going to use my quilter's clapper. This is just a piece of wood, really easy to hold. It's unfinished. After you press this down. It takes the heat out of the fabric and also gives you a better crease than if you don't use one. I also love it because when you're steaming cotton, especially when you're on a smaller ironing board like this that is metal, this fabric gets really hot. So I like to do this not only for how well it helps press that, but it also makes it less hot for my fingers. Then here where we turned it, you just want to have that tucked under with the same seam allowance. So when we're done, nobody's going to know which side you turned. I'm going to use this for the outside, this for the inside. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this down and press that flap. Now you'll notice on the template, it has a line. So you can use that. You're just going to kind of put this up a little bit, like with the seam allowance, right? Because it's still a little bit wider. So you can do it this way. Put your ruler here, move that. You want it about a 1/2 inch down. And then you can fold that, move your ruler, do not iron on an acrylic ruler, and press. Or I was doing that on a different video and somebody told me about this cool product, because we all learn about things at different times, right? So she told me about the Clover hot ruler, and you can iron right on it. So what I do is I put this down and I make sure this line is even on the edges. This point is at that 1/2 inch, and then I can leave this here. I can press on there and do that. It's really cool. I like it for projects like this, but it's really, really handy for bigger projects where maybe you're doing a long strip of fabric and you need it folded down a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch. It's a fun little tool to have in your arsenal. So I just wanted to share that with you. Now we're going to unfold that, and you can see that crease. We're just going to fold this up and put these points to the crease and press. So now we have our shape, and if you just wanted it to be plain and you didn't want a stamp or an address or anything on the back, you would be good to go to sew this together. But we're going to do the whole shebang, so I'm going to show you how to do the stamp and the address piece next. We'll use this as an example. So for the stamp, I cut a 1 inch piece out of fabric, and I usually try and have something that I like in the center. This was cut out of this bottom section, so this is going to work really well. I'm just going to take that and I'm going to fussy cut it, which basically means I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to line that sunflower up inside a 1 inch square. And it's a little bit bigger than 1 inch, so I can either cut some of the petals off on either side, or I could off-center it like that and be artsy. I'm just going to kind of make it the whole center. So I'm just going to turn it and cut all 4 sides, making sure I'm lining it up so that it's going to be about a 1 inch square when we're done. So this is going to be the center of my stamp. So if you have white, I would use a color instead of white for this outer stamp section. So just go into your scrap fabrics I happen to have the same fabric, and you're going to want a piece that is, or at least a 1/4 inch larger than your stamp all the way around. I'm just going to cut this really quickly and make it an odd shape and show you how it really doesn't matter, because when we make it into a stamp, it's going to be perfect. So we're going to sew that onto that. But before we do that, we're going to get our dress section ready. And I'm going to use this yellow again. So I'll have this stamp. Oh, it's going to be interesting. I've never done this in color. So I like to make this 1 inch high and about 2.5 inches long. So this is 2 1/4. That's just what it is. So that's going to be totally fine. So that stamp will be up there. This will be here. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. You can do it with stitching, and I'm going to show you that. Or another way is to use heat transfer vinyl if you have a cutting machine. And that's how I did this. So you would basically take your Cricut, Scan and Cut, Silhouette, whatever you have. You could do a name. You could say for you, whatever you want to do. You would iron that onto that piece of fabric and then sew that onto the envelope. So that's an option, but I'm going to show you the sewing method. So because I want this to be jiggly lines, I actually don't want that on the inside of the envelope. So I am going to sew that before I put it onto the envelope. It's a little harder because this is just one piece of fabric. It's so flexible. So you could either starch that to make it a little bit stiffer, or I am just going to put a little scrap of interfacing on the back to give it a little bit of body and help it to hold its shape while we stitch. Okay, so now we are going to go to the sewing machine. Now I'm just going to quickly sew all 4 sides of this little sunflower stamp image to the gold backing. And I am using a smaller stitch length. I'm using a 1.9, and I'm going to not go all the way to the edge. And the reason I'm using a smaller stitch length is I want to be able to fray that edge because I think it just gives a little fun look to my stamp. So you want to try and be a little more equal distant from the edge. This one is a little bit higher than the rest, but we're just going to wing it. And then I'm just going to take tweezers and I'm just going to pull some of these threads out. And you can do it all the way around. Primitive little frayed look to it. And then it looks purposeful and not like a couple threads are coming out if you don't do it. See, it gives kind of a fun look. And then we'll cut the yellow in a minute. But first, we are going to just sew our address onto our label. And I usually just do 2. You always want to do a contrasting color fabric. If I did black, it would show up a lot more, but I'm just going to do white and see how that looks. And again, I'm using a small stitch length so that we can curve this a little bit more in this short distance. But before we sew these down, we need to trim our stamp. And I'm just going to do that right here so it's easy. So I keep little bowls by my sewing machine for threads. So I'm going to put that down so that I don't end up getting a bunch of little threads into my sewing machine since I've decided to do this right here. So I'm just going to take the pinking shears and I'm going to cut all 4 sides so that it really looks like a stamp and not just a square on a square. So there's our stamp. I do have links to all of the products below the video if there's anything that you decide, oh, I like that and I want that. So now I'm just going to place this stamp and I'm going to sew this on. Now, this time I am going to pull up the bobbin thread, which means I'm going to put the needle down while holding this thread, lift the needle, give a little tug, grab my tweezers. And I always use tweezers because if I use my fingers, I end up stabbing my finger a lot with that sharp needle. Put both threads under the foot and then I'm going to hold that as I start. That is going to avoid having one of those little bird nest knots created underneath your fabric. Now I'm going to place the address. So I'm just going to do the same thing, sew that on there. The next thing we need to do is draw the lines that we are going to sew to make it look like paper folded for an envelope. And you can do this a couple ways. You can use a pencil, you can use a heat erasable pen, you could even just put a little piece of tape as a guideline. I'm going to throw caution to the wind and I'm going to use one of these Frixion pens. They are supposedly not designed for fabric, even though they will go away with heat, but they might come back if the fabric gets too cold. I used them a lot for a while, then I learned that little fact. My Madame So dried up and I don't have a replacement, so we are going to throw caution to the wind because it's an envelope for goodness sake. I don't think it's an heirloom thing that's going to be sticking around so long. So I have drawn the lines on those. Now before I have always done colored outside. So I've always used white so that it shows up really nicely like on this one. But because we're doing a white outside, I'm going to change my thread and I'm going to do gold because I want it to show up. So I'm just going to do a contrasting color to my fabric. Now I'm going to sew the paper line. I'm going to raise the bobbin thread and grab a hold of that so there won't be a big knot underneath because that will be inside my envelope. Then you just want to trim off those threads. And now we're going to sew the envelope closed. If you do Velcro, you need to put the Velcro on before you sew the pocket together because it's really hard to sew that on when this is already together. But because Velcro is so flat, you can sew all the way around once the Velcro is on. So I'll just walk you through how you would do Velcro if that is your choice. Okay, so if we were going to do Velcro, you would sew the soft, or hook and loop, you would sew the soft side on the inside of the flap. Then you would fold this up, you would put this down, fold it up like this to figure out exactly where the other side of the Velcro needs to go so that those two are going to match. Then you would open this back up and sew that on. That's if you're going to do Velcro. Then you would sew it all together. But I want to do a snap because they're super cute. So I am going to sew this together and then we're going to do the snap. I'm going to show you that that can work. And because this is folded, it's basically 4 layers of fabric when you get those seam allowances in there. You can see that my presser foot is really tilted. It's tilting up and flat on the back. To make it more even and move better when it gets started, I'm going to use leader fabrics. This is basically pieces of folded up fabric. Now just squeeze these fabrics back under and put the presser foot down. Now the presser foot is flat and the feet have more to grab onto to get started. It just makes for smoother sewing. You don't have to do it. It's just something I wanted to share with you. So I'm just going to sew all the way around about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And doing this sewing is not only going to be sewing the pocket, but it is also going to sew this area shut where we turned this right side out. To finish this envelope up, we're going to add a snap to close it. And as I've mentioned before, these are called cam snaps. They are plastic snaps. They come in all kinds of colors, made in the USA, family-owned business. I love them. Haven't met the people, but I love the product and I love that it's a US-based company. I have a lot of different colors in which are the circles, just like this. So it's just a circle snap. They also make cute little hearts and stars, and I don't know if they have any other shapes, but for this one, I'm just going to do a dot because I don't know. I liked the heart on the pink for Valentine's Day, but we're going to do a circle on this one, and I chose to use the gold. So what you need are 2 of these pointy pieces, and then you need female part is the innie, and the male part is the outie. You can think of it as a belly button. A 1/2 inch down from this point so that your snap is centered. But I want to show you how to really figure that out instead of just measuring, because sometimes maybe you stitched a little further from the edge. The main thing is you don't want this circle to be on this seam allowance where it's a little bit thicker. So you want to kind of feel in your fabric for how far up it needs to be so that it's going to be nice and flat and not tilted. So I'm going to say right there, which is a little bit more than that 1/2 inch. Not much, but a teeny bit. So I just put that there. And then put the awl, which is like an ice pick for fabric. Be very careful. It just pokes a hole in there. Then you're going to put the circle side with the point through the fabric on the outside. You're going to just use your fingers and push down. Make sure the fabric is down. And then you're going to take the female side, or the outie belly button side, and put that on top. Now you're going to grab the press to put these on. The circular part is going to sit right in the divot of this black area. And then the outie or innie is going to sit on this white plastic part. So you're going to get that in there. And then I always just kind of turn it and investigate, make sure it's centered in there before I squeeze. Now, when I squeeze, what is happening is this is flattening the plastic point inside this piece so that that piece is connected and going to stay on there. So that's great. We have the outside. Now, how do we decide where to put this one? It's very simple. You take the snap, you fold it down, and you press. See how that leaves a circular mark right there? rally snap part leaves a mark. You're going to take the awl and you're going to poke a hole in the center of that circle, being really careful just to go a little bit in. Don't go through the front of your envelope. Make your hole. This time you're going to take the circle piece and you're going to go from the inside of the envelope, put it in there, press it down, put the other half on, and you're just going to repeat the process with this press to secure this half of the snap. And that is it. It's done. Look at how cute. So here are some examples. This one, I just did a stamp. I didn't do the address part. This one, I used my Cricut and used heat transfer vinyl. This one has a Velcro close and it has a sewn address, kind of like this one. And the stamp, you can definitely see that more because I used a darker thread than on this one. You just experiment as you go. And now these are ready to use. And remember, you can get the free template by signing up for my email. And that gives you the shape to cut here and this top point. If you're already on my email list, just fill out the form from the link and it'll get sent right to you. If you've never opted in before, you'll have an opt-in email and then you will get it sent right to you. Happy sewing. In today's tutorial, I am going to show you how to make these super cute heart pockets. You can make them plain where this part is just folded over. You can add any kind of trim you want if you want to make it a little bit fancier. They are the perfect size for gift cards if you want to give something a little bit extra. I am going to share all my secrets of how to whip these up quickly. I've come up with a few ways to cut down on time, cut down on hand cutting, and get these things made quickly. So let's get started. Now let's talk about the supplies. It is not as overwhelming as this might look. Basically, grab your fabric scraps, any embellishments if you want to put something on the pocket. This one I put the cute little balls on there. This one I just left it plain with the fabric folded. Both are cute in their own way. So fabric scraps and embellishments, we'll move that so it looks less overwhelming. We're going to use pink on the back and this heart fabric on the front. Then you can get this free template on my website. You're going to need fabric scissors. If you have them, I recommend pinking shears. I always use pinking shears for the curves. And I like these Fiskars Easy Action. Any kind of scissors they have where I squeeze like this, instead of having your thumb in that circle, it is much, much easier on your hands. Then you're going to need an iron and an ironing board, regular scissors, a turning tool to help get the points pressed out and the curves pressed out when we're turning that right side out. Then, if you want to use some of my little time-saving tricks, grab your freezer paper and grab a glue stick. I will show you how we're going to use those to make the pattern making process that much quicker. Let's get started. First, we're going to grab a freezer paper. If you have never used freezer paper for sewing, this is going to change your life. Okay, maybe not that dramatic, but I think it's pretty life-changing. So I'm going to grab a piece that is bigger than my heart. Never cuts very well for me. I don't know why, but it will be fine. Now, for freezer paper, the one side is shiny, and that usually goes against your food, and then the other side is flat. The beauty about using freezer paper is if you iron the shiny part onto fabric, it will stick to the fabric. So then your template is just going to be stuck to the fabric. You don't have to pin it. I love doing this for shapes that have a lot of curve to them or that are smaller or delicate. So I'm going to show you how to use this for the heart and the pocket. We're going to turn it the smooth side up. I'm going to take my paper scissors. I'm going to cut away some of the extra paper. Now, if you don't have freezer paper, you can just use this obviously as a regular pattern, but I like using the freezer paper. Then I'm going to grab my glue stick and I'm going to just put it around the edges. I'm going to glue this onto the smooth side of the freezer paper. Then again, with my paper scissors, I'm going to cut out the templates. It always curls up a little bit. I believe you can also buy freezer paper that will go through your printer. So if you do a lot of things where you're doing small pieces and you like this concept, have a look for that. That will also be listed in my Amazon storefront. You can find that link in the video description. There will be links for the scissors that I love and all that sort of thing as well. So now I have a heart template out of freezer paper. Now let's do the pocket. I'm going to put this on fabric so you can see it. So on the template, it shows you to cut on the fold. These two were made by putting the dashed line on the fold. So you're seeing a lot more of the top. If you want a deeper pocket, you can cut from this top line which is going to be about a 1/2 inch up. We're going to do that taller side so that we can compare these at the end. If you don't have a scrap of fabric that is long enough for you to cut on the fold, of course you can cut 2 of these. Just add a 1/4 inch for your seam allowance, or know that it will be a little bit smaller than you expect based on the template. So I have my ironing board out, my iron on, and we are going to use this heart fabric for the large heart. So I'm going to get my freezer paper heart, and we are going to put it the dull side up, the shiny side down. Now, it is important to remember, if you're using directional fabric, you need to pay attention. So if we're using a solid color, you can turn this any angle to be as efficient as possible with the fabric that you cut. But if you're using directional, don't do what I did. So I decided to be efficient when I cut these little gnomes, and now they're all sideways. So that wasn't very efficient because I didn't like it, and I had to start again. So if you have anything with direction, make sure you have the direction going towards the top of the heart. It's not a non-directional heart print, it is a directional print, so we're going to pay attention to that. I'm going to put this down here, and then I'm just going to put a little bit of heat on there. Look at that, it sticks. Totally cool. Now you can either cut 2 to the size, or I'm going to show you one of my efficiency tricks. And if you've watched my baby bib tutorials, this is going to be the same way that I do the towels. We're just going to cut 1 heart with fabric scissors. And I cut as close to that as possible, but if it's a little bit off, I do not worry about it because it is all going to even up as we sew all these pieces together. Then once you have that cut, you just peel that off, and you're going to be able to use this piece of freezer paper over and over again. I'm not exactly sure how many times, but I have used one at least 5 times. It will start to get duller, so it may not stick as well. You may need to make a few of these templates if you're going to be making a lot of hearts. But let me know in the comments if you make a lot and you figure out just how many times you can use that freezer paper. I would love to know. So instead of cutting 2 hearts for this heart, I'm going to use 1 cut from the template and then 1 that is 7 inches by 6 inches. And so we're going to be sewing that together before we cut the shape. Because it's so curved, we're going to have to cut the whole thing, either clipping the curves or cutting with pinking shears. So I'm going to do this, and that's going to make sure it all lines up perfectly. You can use the same fabric. I'm just going to use some of this hot pink for the back. Now let's work on our pockets. We have the pocket template, and it needs to be cut on the fold. So I'm going to take this pink, and I'm going to fold it so it's not much longer than to the point. So I put the point right by that edge, and then I just fold back until that is on the fold and press. You might want to put a pin or 2, but I usually just try and keep it nice and flat and trim that. Now there's lots of ways that you can dress this up. The embellishments that I showed you in the beginning, if you wanted to add trim, something like that. If you have an embroidery machine, you could also embroider a name on the pocket. I would do that before you even cut it. Embroider a name, make sure it's not going to be bigger than that pocket, and remember about your seam allowances. You could embroider something. You could use heat transfer vinyl with your Cricut or other cutting machine and do something fun with that. You could embroider. All kinds of options. You could then, add this pink ribbon on the top, add this, but I think this is going to be plenty with the hearts here and this pink, so we're just going to keep it basic for now. But let me know in the comments what you would put on here, what you're planning to do. The next thing we're going to do is I'm going to just put 2 clips on here, and we're going to go to the sewing machine, and we're going to base about 1/8 of an inch from the edge to sew this pocket to the heart. I like to do that because then all 3 of these layers are already attached. It makes it a lot easier when you've left this section open and you have to have it turn under to close. Having to turn 3 loose things under, and then of course the other side too, is a little bit more daunting. It works a lot better if you sew this down first. So now the pocket is tacked down onto the front of the heart. Now we're going to take the fabric that is the back. This is a solid color, so there's no front or back, but if there was, we would be putting these right sides together. Then you're just going to put a few pins, usually right at the curves, just to make sure everything stays in place as you are sewing. I made this area pretty straight so that we have an easier place to turn and get that tucked under to finish the little pillow. But the rest of it is really very curved. And when you're sewing curves, you want to use a small stitch length. That is going to help that flip and be a better curve when you turn it right side out. So I usually do 1.8 to 2.0. So we're going to start down here. We're going to go all the way around and stop about here, leaving a few inches open for turning. Now, if you forget to do that, which I do sometimes, all you're going to do is go back and go back and forth here and back and forth here, use your seam ripper and open that section up. So, and one thing that I sometimes do to remind myself to stop, put this little Riley Blake bird here where I need to stop. Now this time we're going to sew all the way around with a 1/4 inch seam. Just go slow on these tighter curves, and if you need to, because you feel like your foot or your guide is getting off of there too much, you can leave your needle down, lift your foot, and just twist the fabric a little bit. Now, it's often hard to know exactly where to turn when you get into this inner point. So you can either just wing it, because this is not an exact science and no two hearts are the same, and turn wherever, or you can use a ruler and you can make a mark a 1/4 inch down from here. So your ruler needs to be like that. Make a mark like right there. That's a heat erasable pen. So now I know that when my needle gets to right about there, it's time to lift my foot and pivot. Now we're getting to the bird, so it is time to stop. And now we are done with the sewing machine. Next, we're going to grab our pinking shears, or if you don't have fabric pinking shears, you're going to take your fabric scissors and cut all the way around. And then you are going to have to take some smaller scissors and clip these curves. So doing little bitty cuts like this in and making sure you do not cut that stitch line. I'm going to do it from this side because then it's easier for you to see the stitch line. But same with the pinking shears, you need to be very careful not to cut the stitches. I will tell you, you can't cut with the pinking shears in here. Every single time I've tried to go all the way into there, I have cut the stitches. If that happens, or if you end up cutting stitches anywhere, you have to reinforce that, because when you turn it right side out, you will get little frayed edges of the fabric and you will be able to tell that you cut through those stitches because it's not going to curve properly and it'll basically create a hole. So I go to about there. Now with my pinking shears, don't go all the way in. I'll show you how to fix that center part after we go around with the pinking shears. Now the next thing to remember is only cut with the pinking shears where you have stitched, which basically means you don't want to cut really close at that opening or we're going to have nothing to turn under. So I stop just short of the end here. This is why I often keep a lint brush right by, pick all that junk up. And then I'm going to take straight fabric scissors and cut the back the same size as the front. So you see we have a little bit that we can tuck under. Now we just need to work on this point. So you're just going to take your scissors and snip right into the point and maybe do 2 next to it so that that fabric will move and we can get a nice shape. Also make sure you cut off this edge on the bottom point so that we can get a nice shape there as well. Next step, we're going to turn this right side out. I always start just using my finger and pushing it along the curve to get that curve started and try and get that point. Sometimes it works better than other times. Then you can just use your fingers, or I like to use a turning tool. You can use a chopstick, you can use a closed pen and gently push that along a curve. If you push too hard, it might come out because it might break those stitches because we did clip pretty close to that. Then I'm going to press. I know we're going to stuff this, but it's going to have a better shape if we press these seams out into the shape before we add the stuffing. So I'm pressing it everywhere it is sewn first, leaving that section to do last. Then I'm just going to push that under so that that seam allowance is tucked under and the line is still good. So there we go. You could leave this flat if you wanted to. You could actually make this a little pocket coaster. You could just sew around, but we're doing stuffed pocket hearts. So I'm going to grab my polyfill and start stuffing. When I'm stuffing something like this, I always start by stuffing the area that is furthest from the turning hole and then work my way towards there. And I like to do small amounts at a time. because that way you can get it spread out and in all the little curves and nooks and crannies the way you want it, instead of having a big lump that you're trying to move around later. If you like doing stuffed projects, there's also a tool that is designed, it has this little hook, and it is designed for helping with stuffing. It's especially helpful if you're doing doll making and things that have really skinny and small areas. You don't really need it for this, but you can use it to just kind of help push things around. So I have this stuff to about here. Now I'm going to start working on this other upper part. What do you think you would use these for? Are you going to use them for just holiday decoration? Are you going to use them as gift holders that can be decoration for whoever gets the gift? Let me know in the comments what you're thinking. I also think these could be really, really pretty for like a bridal shower. You could do it for decorations, do white, use some satins, put some lace. I don't know, I've got a lot of ideas for these little things. Let me know what you're thinking. Now, before you get ready to close it up, make sure you have some stuffing in that point, which I don't. So you always squeeze that point, and then I'm just going to use this tool to kind of scooch some of that down there. And then you also want to make sure you're going to have enough that when you hand stitch this together, it's going to smooth out and be pretty even. That looks pretty good. Sometimes people don't stuff this enough so that it's easier to sew, and then they kind of have an air pocket by where they have turned everything. So then I just put clips. You can also put pins, either way, and that's it. Then you're just going to do a little slip stitch to close that up. I usually do that while I'm watching TV, and you're going to have a cute little heart. So we did the taller size than this one, so you can see that that pocket is a little bit higher. This one to this one. Let me know which one you prefer. The taller pocket would definitely be better if you wanted to embellish this in some way like that. There's not quite as much room on this. Otherwise, it's truly just personal preference. And remember, you can download the free template so that you can get to work on that. All right, so what do you think? Are you going to be making hearts? Are you going to make them for decorations for yourself? Use them for gifts? Other things? Leave me a comment and let me know. I am always curious about how people are using the things they make from my tutorials. Happy sewing and have a fantastic day.
If you haven't guessed, today I'm going to show you how quick and easy it is to make a heart quilt block. If you have never tried quilting or made a quilt block before, this is a great one to start with because it is really simple and it has so many uses. Great, obviously, for Valentine's Day, weddings, romance, anything. You can make quilts. This can be the beginning of any kind of a project that has to do with love. Now, most people think about doing a heart like this, where the heart is red or some kind of print that's red or pink with white or a neutral background. But don't limit yourself. It's also cute if you do it the opposite way, where your neutral color is the heart and then you have something brighter and more fun as the background. I'm going to show you how easy this is to do. You can also download my free PDF that will show you how to make this in different sizes. Let's get started. For today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make a 10-inch, and we're going to make it the opposite way. So we're going to make it the more traditional way, and then you'll be able to see the difference. For any heart, you need 8 pieces of fabric. So you need 2 pieces that are going to be the center of the heart. To create a 10-inch heart, you're going to cut this to 5.5 inches by 10.5 inches. Then you're going to need your background fabrics. You're going to need 2 squares that are 5.5-inch square. And this is going to be for the bottom. And then you're going to need 4 squares that are 2 inches square. And that is going to be for these top corners. We're going to move that aside for a second. And the first thing you're going to do on the wrong side, there's really not a wrong side to white fabric. But say you were using this for the outside, you would draw on this side, the wrong side of the fabric, not the prettiest side. And you're going to draw a diagonal line through all 6 of your squares. And I am using a heat erasable pen. If you've watched many of my videos, you know this is one of my favorite things in the world because it is so easy to see and it is so fun to get rid of because all you do is you hit it with the iron and it disappears. And I'm telling you, every time it happens, I'm like a 5-year-old going, wow, that's so cool. How do they do that? I don't know. I'm just glad that they do. Okay, now that we have all those set up, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to sew the bottom squares onto the rectangles. And you always want to place them both together before you sew, because sometimes if you're chain stitching or daisy chaining, whatever you want to call it, you might pivot this the wrong way. You have to make sure they're going the opposite direction, so it's going to make the bottom of the heart. You don't want to do it like that unless you're planning on making 2 sets. But if you're making one, we need it to go this way. And a great thing to do when you're doing any kind of a quilt block, if you're laying it out in one place and then moving it to your sewing machine, is to use what they call design boards. And this basically has a little bit of fuzz, so it kind of holds the fabric, and you can lay your quilt block out. It's especially helpful if you're doing blocks where everything isn't layered on top of each other, but I find it a nice way to just like put my things together, carry it like it's a tray of food over to my sewing machine. So let's go and get this sewn. I have my stitch length set pretty small, which I do whenever I'm doing a quilt block. I have it at a length of 2.0. And now I'm just going to sew down this line that we drew on both squares. Now you could daisy chain this like this, but it's a little harder for the sewing machine, especially if you're using a walking foot, to grab it. So for this pattern, I like to start from this side. So I get this side lined up and it's parallel to this one that we just sewed. Now I'm going to make sure I have this lined up perfectly again. You can pin them, but I find if you just really adjust it precisely, when you're at your sewing machine, you can have great results. Now we have the 2 bottom sides sewn on, the 2 bottom squares, and you're going to take a ruler and you're going to cut 1/4 inch from that stitch line. I do love this ruler from Riley Blake Designs. The blue part is exactly 1/4 inch, so it's really quick and easy to just line the edge of that blue up with the stitching, cut that off, good to go. So the next thing we need to do is we're going to grab the ironing board and we are going to iron that flat. Now the first thing I'm going to do is what is called setting the seam, which basically means we're going to press on the seam as is, just as it's sewn, before we flip it. It's just going to press everything down a little bit more and give us a crisper seam when we go and do it this way. You'll also know, like if you're doing a bunch of these at once, you'll know that you have set the seam, because when you set the seam, the line will disappear. All right, so we set that seam, press the quilter's clapper on there, basically a piece of wood that's really comfortable to hold. It absorbs some of the heat and flattens it. Now we are going to just press these out. And before you take the iron to it, just kind of look at it and make sure that it's going to look like a rectangle. You know, if you don't have it all the way out, you might see a little bit over here. So you want to kind of pre-press it with your fingers to get it as close to that rectangle shape as possible. And you're going to iron over that seam. Grab your quilter's clapper, press down on that. And that one side is done. We've already set this seam, so now we're just going to be pressing it open. Again, looking to make sure this line and this line are looking good. Okay, the bottom half of our heart is done. I'm going to get my design board back. I'm going to put these 2 halves down. And now we are going to take the smaller pieces and we are going to put them on here to make sure we have them facing the right direction. And there is a diagram if you need to follow that on the free PDF that you can get. You can find the link below this video, but you can also kind of look at it. And when you look at these lines, it makes a heart. So you want to make sure you don't put them both in the same direction or do the opposite directions. But if you happen to do that, that is what seam rippers are for. So now let's head back and we'll sew these 4 on. Just like with the bigger squares, you can pin them. You can use a little glue stick to glue that down if you want to, or you can just make sure it is lined up perfectly as you go to sew each of these lines. I am going to daisy chain them. See how they're lined up? Kind of the opposite side. That way, the fabrics aren't overlapping each other, so you're not going to get any kind of warping, but you can get this right in there really nicely. Saves a little bit of time and thread. So if you make a heart, what would be your first project? Like, what are you thinking? Let me know in the comments. I would love to know what you plan to do with this type of a quilt block. Just like with the bigger squares, we're going to do the same thing. These top squares, we're going to trim 1/4 inch from that stitch line. All right, we got that stitch. Now we're going to be pressing those out just like we did with these bottom ones. Going to set those seams, get rid of that pen mark. You don't have to use a quilter's clapper. It's just a little extra step that gets it set just that much better, I guess. And it definitely makes it so the fabric isn't as hot when you're touching it. And just like with the bottom ones, kind of finger press this out, make sure it's giving you a nice rectangle shape. Now we just have one step left. And this one I do pin or clip. I'm going to pin this time. So we are going to take these the inside parts, and we're going to line them up, and we're going to pin that together. We're going to sew down here with a 1/4 inch seam. So as you're lining this up, you're lining up the raw edges. You want to line up where the point meets. So you get a nice point, and then also be paying attention to this edge too, just to make sure it's all kind of lining up, because they should be 2 rectangles that fit perfectly on top of each other. Sometimes it's not exactly perfect, but it should be close. It shouldn't be, doing that. So I'm just going to throw 3 pins in that, and then we will sew that seam. Our last step is to press this open so we have our square, but first we're going to set that seam. And then instead of pressing to one side for this center seam, I like to press the seam open. It will reduce the bulk, because if you do it all to one side, it's going to be super bulky at one end. So I just run my fingers along there to kind of finger press and open that up, and then use my iron. Now we have a heart. Isn't that cute? So let's compare it to the negative space one. So here is the 10-inch block that we just made. And here is the 10-inch block where I used white for the heart and the flowers for the outside. So it's kind of a fun play with color. It would be really cute to kind of mix and match these, maybe put some sashing down the middle. I just wanted to make sure you could really see the difference between using the print and the color on the inside versus the outside of the heart. And again, you can get the free PDF that gives you 5 different sizes: the 10-inch, 12-inch, 8-inch, 6-inch, and 4-inch. Happy quilting! Be sure to subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss other quilt blocks, simple projects, and sewing tips and tricks.
In today's video, I'm going to show you how to quickly make a mug rug using the 6-inch heart quilt block. And if you haven't made this block before, check the description below. There is a link to a full video that shows you how to make this simple block in 5 different sizes. So I didn't just want this hanging out in my scrap bin. I wanted to put it to use. So let's whip this into a mug rug in no time. We're going to use quilt as you go method, some trim, some fabric scraps. So first off, I want to tell you there's no such thing as mug rug police, okay? You can make this any size that you want. It's basically called a mug rug because it is a rectangle and looks like a rug. If it was a square, we would call it a coaster, which you could turn that into a coaster too, but we're doing mug rugs today. I digress. So I have cut a piece of fusible fleece that is 7.5 inches by 11. You can also use flex foam. You can use batting with a little bit of muslin to give it that stability, any kind of padding for the inside. Then I'm going to take this quilt block. I'm not putting it all the way on the edge or all the way in a corner. I'm going to have it equidistant from the side, because when you do quilt as you go, the part that you're quilting, you want it a little bit bigger, and then we're going to trim it to size. The size is going to be 7 by 10, and then we're going to self-bind this, meaning we're just going to sew it, flip it right side out, and be done, instead of doing more traditional quilt binding on it. I just want something quick, fun, and cute. This would be great for a teacher gift, for your mom, for your bestie, anybody that you just want to say, you know what, I appreciate you. You make my heart smile. We're going to use this. And then I grabbed some other scraps that just kind of went with this fabric. I decided the yellow's a little bit much, so I'm not going to use that. I could do some strips with this, but no, I think I'm going to just keep it simple. I'm going to put red all the way around and on this side. And then I just want to play with some trim, quick and simple. So now let's take this over to the sewing machine and start quilting as we go. And I'll show you what that means. I've pinned the heart block on the fleece where I want it. And now I'm going to just sew a little strip of red over here. So I'm going to take this scrap and I'm going to line the raw edge up with the raw edge of the quilt block, like that. You can pin it or you can just wing it. I'm just going to put 2 little pins in there to make sure that that stays straight. I'm going to turn it and I'm going to just sew with a 1/4 inch seam from that edge. And now I'm going to flip that. So you'll see the raw edge of both of these is right in there. And this is why it is called quilt as you go, because we're just sewing this on directly to the fleece. Now I'm using this little roller thing, can't remember what that's called, to flatten that. And then I'm just going to cut that off, even with that. Now I'm just going to stitch about 1/8 of an inch from there to do the quilting. And I'm not knotting at the ends because this is going to be trimmed to size. Now I'm just going to continue adding the red so that I have the fleece completely covered and this heart block surrounded. So I'm going to be lining up the raw edge with the raw edges of the block because we do want to make sure we are coming in exactly 1/4 inch from the heart quilt block. And then this goes over, you'll see. So I'm going to make sure that this scrap goes farther than the fleece because again, we're going to trim this at the end. I do love that this, you just kind of wing it and sew and have fun. I'm just going to flip that. And you can either finger press it. I do like this little roller thing. Gets that nice and pressed to then just go back and throw a little quilting in there. I'm going to do the same thing on the top, making sure that this piece is going over the edge of that fleece and a little bit over the edge of this block, but lined up here, both raw edges. So again, you'll see the fleece is a lot smaller than my scraps. I'm just letting them hang over the edge. Doesn't matter at all. I can take these pins out now because that's nice and secure where it is. Now we're going to put our 4th one on, lining up the raw edge of the block with the raw edge of the red. Now, if you have fabric that has a right and wrong side, make sure you're putting right sides together. This is really easy and mindless if you're using solid colors. Design-wise, using odd numbers usually looks really good. Your eye isn't always sure why, but it's the truth. So I think I'm going to do white, pink, and white. I don't know, it looks very Valentines-y. So I'm just going to make it basically as long as that red because I know it will be longer than what I need. Okay, I did pin that because I do want to make sure it stays straight. I don't want to wing it and have it going all crooked. You could also glue base that down if you want to, but I thought pins were quick and easy. All right, so there's white. Now let's put a pink. I do love doing projects sometimes that you can just literally put together at your sewing machine. You're not moving back and forth from your cutting space to your sewing machine. It's just nice and quick. I'm also eyeballing it. You could use your ruler to make sure they're exactly evenly spaced, but I'm not going to do that this time. All right, now I'm going to do a little bit more quilting on the heart. I think I'm going to stitch about 1/4 inch around the inside of the heart, as much or as little as you want to do. The next step is to trim our quilted mug rug top to match the back. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim it to the size of the backing. So I know what I'm starting with. Just get the extra scraps trimmed off of there. Because we want to make sure we get this trimmed straight so that our mug rug doesn't look crooked and cattywampus. It's a fun word, isn't it? Cattywampus. So that looks good. Remember, that's going to be like that. So you can kind of do this. I tried this one time where I just put it on top and sewed it and then trimmed it. And I found that I didn't put it straight. So some of my lines on the front ended up being a little bit crooked. Not ideal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line this up so I can visually see what's going on here. Get this lined up on my mat. Make sure I have a little more than 1/4 inch over the rickrack and also over this side. And then I'm going to trim this to the 10 inches wide. Now we need to get it to 7 inches. So we need to trim basically 1/2 inch off. I just like to use that back for visual. You just want to make sure we have at least 1/4 inch on each side of this heart. I don't want it coming in too close. I want a little bit of red left. Okay, now we're going to do right sides together. We're going to put the back on top of, well, we'll do it this way. So there our walking foot is going on top of this, and we are just going to pin this together. And I'm going to leave this entire edge open for turning. Instead of doing a small spot, I find it turns better with a straighter, less obvious line if I leave one of the short ends open. And because this end is so short, with that red, I want to make sure that's sewn really well. So I'm going to leave this end open. So we're going to sew here, here, here. Okay, now I'm going to clip those corners. I'm going to turn it right side out. And then I'm going to take it to the ironing board and press it. And we're going to turn this edge under and press that. I do wish I had done these a little bit closer to the heart, but we're going to make it work. Now I have it pressed and this pressed under. So I'm going to sew all the way around the edge to close that seam. And so you won't really be able to tell. And then I might add a little bit more quilting just to keep it all together. And then it is going to be done. And now it is all done. We have the back, it's self-bound. Is it perfect? No, I would have moved these over a teeny bit, but I still love it. It is ready for my mug. And now I just need a cute treat to put over there and I'm good to go. Or if you want to give it as a gift, you can roll it up, put it in a mug, put some cookies or some candy in there. You can also grab a free tag that explains what it is if you're giving it as a gift. Look for the link below this video to find that. So if you have any little quilt blocks lying around, 6-inch is perfect to make a mug rug. And this one is ready for Valentine's Day. Today, we are going to take the heart quilt blocks and turn it into a gift bag. I'm going to use the smallest size, the 4-inch block, and turn it into a sweet little gift bag for Valentine's Day. Now, if you haven't made this heart block yet, check the link below in my video, and I have another video tutorial that'll show you how to make this, and you can get the free directions to make it in 5 different sizes. But let's get started turning this little sweet heart into a sweet little gift bag. Let's talk about the supplies we need to make this super cute drawstring quilt bag. First, you're going to need the 4-inch heart quilt block. And if you don't know how to make that, there is a link below in the description. So we need 2 lining pieces, a back, and then a few different strips to make this. Then for this bag, we're going to do an external channel. Let me show you. So this one has a white heart. The one we're going to make is going to have the flowered heart. So it'll be the opposite of this. We're going to do a fabric channel that gives it a little bit different accent, just a different way to do a drawstring bag. So for that, we need 2 pieces of fabric because there is going to be the channel obviously on both sides. Then 2 pieces of whatever you want to use for your drawstring. I used a satin ribbon. Then I just always keep an inexpensive bottle of clear nail polish in my studio to put on the ends of things that are going to fray. Then you need pins or clips, a safety pin that's going to help you get your drawstring through the channel, heat erasable pen, huge fan of those, some rulers, rotary cutter, rotary mat, sewing machine, obviously, ironing board. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to assemble the front of the bag that has the heart on it. So you have these 2 pieces, the skinnier one on the bottom and the bigger one on the top, because we need to have room for that channel, a little puffy fun on the top, and make sure that the heart doesn't get scrunched. So the first step is to sew these 2 sides onto the heart block. So I am just going to clip those together. We're going to sew them with a 1/4-inch seam, and then we are going to press the seams away from the heart. Now I sewed these 2 sides to the heart block, and you'll notice my heart block was a little bit short. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a ruler and I'm going to square that up. So it'll be a little bit shorter, but don't you worry, I'm going to show you how to fix this. I'm sure I'm not the first person to have a slightly off block. Next, we are going to clip and sew these 2 pieces on. There's one piece of fabric that's just a piece of fabric, and there's another piece that has multiple seams to go over. I like to have the seams up so that I can make sure they stay in the direction that we press them as we sew. I'm going to stitch and press that, and then we will do the same for the larger piece. Now we have the front of the bag sewn together, and this is a little bit smaller. So you could either wing it, but then you're going to have a really small margin there if you do a seam allowance. So I am just going to take this, line up my 3 pretty good edges, and I'm just going to trim this so that it is straight on this side.
Now you might be saying, Tara, now everything else is going to be messed up. Your lining's not going to be right. The back isn't going to be right, but don't you worry. I'm going to show you how to fix that too. All right, so our top is done. So now I'm going to take the back and both of the lining pieces. I'm going to place the front on top of that stack. And you'll see it's a little bit bigger, so I lined up these two edges. And now I'm just going to trim these other three so that everything is the same size. Now that we have everything sized correctly, the next step is to sew our lining pieces together and our outer bag pieces together. So you'll notice that when I put these together to cut, I already put them right sides together so they would be ready to roll. Then I'm going to take the back of the outside and place it on top of the right side of the heart. Now you can pin or clip. Big fan of clips. I find them faster and they never poke me. Do you have a preference? Have you ever tried fabric clips? Or are you a pinner? Let me know in the comments. Let's have a contest. Pins versus clips. When I sew the outside, I will flip it this way just so that I can make sure these all stay in the direction that they are pressed. So I probably should have put the clips the opposite way. You'll notice one side is flat and one side is colored and curved. It still works even if they're upside down. So we're going to sew down across, so both long sides and the bottom of the outside, leaving the top end open. For the lining, we're going to go down both sides and only part way on each side of the bottom. You want to leave about 3 inches open for turning. And I usually just take this heat erasable pen, draw some little lines so that when I'm sewing, I don't forget. But if you do forget and you do the whole thing, that is what seam rippers are for. Once we sew those, we are going to press the seams open as best we can. It is a little tricky to press the bottom seams open, but do the best you can because having them pressed open is going to make doing our box bottoms that much easier. You don't need to cut the corners like you do in many projects because we're making a box bottom and that will get cut off automatically. So we just need to press these seams open. I've pressed most of the seams. On the lining, I pressed it like it was sewn, but it does have that opening. That's going to help me close that properly later. I'm going to just put this piece of fabric down so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so on these box corners, we're going to need this to be flat because we're going to sew across. And you want this seam lined up with this seam. So I have found, I do this different every time. So this has been pressed open and this has been partially pressed open. So to finish it, I'm going to line up these two seams by pulling this out, open the bottom of this seam with my fingers, and then I'm just going to feel and make sure I have these seams lined up. You can take a pin, put it straight through that seam, and then see if it comes out the seam. Nope, not quite. So now I know I just need to scooch that over a little bit so that the pin is going through the seam on both sides. I'm going to hold that flat. I'm going to test one other section. Okay, got it good. Now I'm just going to place that down. I'm going to hit that with some heat. And I've learned that by doing this while we're ironing, it makes making our boxed corners go a lot faster. All right, so we have these sewn together. We have these pressed, so we're ready to do the box bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each of the 4 corners and I'm going to lay it flat. Okay, I'm going to do it like I'm right-handed. I'm going to lay it flat with the point going to the left. Then I'm going to take a ruler and we're going to draw a line 1 inch up the seam. We're just going to go straight across. If you prefer, you can measure 2 inches. You'll see it goes from 3 to 5. So it's 2 inches long and it's 1 inch up. So whichever way you prefer, go for it. Then I'm just going to pin that so it stays flat and we're going to repeat for all 4 corners. And again, this is a heat erasable pen. Some people might freak out that it's a little bit dark. We're going to stitch right on that line, but if for some reason you still feel like it might show, you can just hit it with the iron and it disappears. To me, that is a must-have for everyone who sews. Okay, we have all 4 corners pinned, so now we're just going to sew on that line. Now, if you want to save a little bit of time and thread and you want to daisy chain these, I have found putting them in the opposite direction works the best because then you're not overlapping. You don't have a bunch of nonsense and you're not trying to get across that big gap. It just lines up perfectly and you can really get it in there. Just make sure it's feeding right to that line and keep sewing. Then you just cut the first one off, turn it over, and repeat. Okay, well, joke's on me. I have 2 cameras that I use for filming these videos, and I thought both were on, and one was not. So I cut off these corners without it actually filming. So I'm just gonna walk you through it. It's pretty easy. We had all of the box corners sewn on the lines that we drew, and then you're just gonna come back, pretend that's sewn. And you're going to take a ruler and you're going to line it up 1/4 inch from that stitch line. And you're going to take your rotary cutter and you're going to cut off those ends. So we cut off all 4 of those box corners. Now we need to sew the top edge. So we need to get these bags right sides together. I like to turn the outer bag right side out, push out those corners, and I put this inside the lining. We just leave that because, again, we want to get these together, right sides together. And the reason I put the outer bag into the lining is so once I sew, I already have this ready to go with access to the opening to turn it right side out. So we're going to match these seams, and I like to match both sides of the seams first. Then I just kind of pull it out, and that usually lines those raw edges up quite nicely. But if they're a little bit off, just scooch them with your fingers and get those clipped into place. Now we are going to sew all the way around the top with a 1/4 inch seam. We don't have to leave anything open, so we're going to get a nice stitch line on that top of our bag because we already have the opening to turn in the bottom of the lining because we are super smart like that. If you have a sewing machine where you can remove your accessory tray and get this fed into your machine so that you can stitch on top, do that. That is not the kind of machine I am using. So I have to basically sew on the lining and go around. So I just keep it out of the way this way. Both work. Now we have that top sewn. I'm just gonna grab some scissors and quickly cut off some of these longer threads. You do have to be careful with stray threads in your bag if you have white, because if you have one of these dark red threads floating around, you're gonna see it and it's gonna make you sad. Now we are just going to turn this right side out through the bottom. Now before we press this, you need to close this opening in the bottom. And you can either hand stitch it so that it'll be totally invisible, or if you don't mind a little bump, you can put it on your sewing machine and just stitch straight across. I usually do that, honestly, because it's at the bottom of a bag, really not the part most people are inspecting. So you'll see there's a little bit of a bump there, but you're not going to notice that in the bottom of a bag, especially since I matched the thread. The next thing we need to do is push the lining inside the bag, and then we have to press this top edge. So we want to get it so the seam is out and you're not seeing the outside on the inside and you're not seeing the lining on the outside. So I get it lined up, started, and iron that, and then I just keep adjusting where that seam is as I move it around. And I like to take my time with this step because this is going to be the very top edge of your bag, and having it pressed really well and lined up really well makes a difference to how professional your bag looks. Now, the next thing we need to do is make our channel for our drawstring. So I'm going to grab my 2 pieces of fabric and I'm just going to finger press them in half. So I had the wrong side up. I'm going to finger press. I'm not going to press with the iron because we don't want this crease to stay. It's just a guideline. Now, I often say fold this ends under 1/4 inch, then blah, blah, blah. But sometimes you then have to adjust it to your bag. I'm going to show you my new secret. Lay my bag flat. You're going to line your drawstring up 1.5 inches down from your top edge. So I'm going to place my ruler a little bit past 1.5 inches, and I'm going to take this, don't worry, heat erasable pen, and it will be under the channel. I'm going to draw a line there. And I'm going to do the same on the back. Now you want to get your bag so that your seams are on each side. So not twisted, but you want your seam right on the edge because these channels are going to each end at the seam. So now I'm going to lay this on top of the bag. Doesn't really matter where compared to that line. And I'm going to fold it so that line lines up. Now, before I press it, I'm going to move it off because now that I'm thinking about it, I already drew a heat erasable line. And if I did this on top of here, that line would go away. And then I'd have to do it again, which wouldn't be the end of the world, but heck, why do it if you don't have to? Just scoot your fabric a teeny bit. But this way, you're going to have these ends folded over exactly the amount they need to be. So you're not going to have to adjust it later. And I'm going to do one at a time because I want to make sure I put it on the correct side that I made it for. Now you can see where we had finger pressed, right? We have that faint line. You're going to fold the raw edge of the fabric into that line and press. And it's okay if that line disappears now because the other raw edge is just going to be folded to match this first raw edge. I'm going to flip that over and I'm going to pin this on and then we'll do the second side. So I'm going to line this up just above that line that I drew because remember we drew it a little bit more than 1.5 inches down. And I'm going to start at that side seam. Just make sure it stays nice and flat and those ends that we just pressed stay under. You don't want to pin it to the back, so make sure you pick it up as you do this. So this way of doing a drawstring basically makes it so that where the drawstring goes is a decorative element of your bag. So we have that one all set up. Now we're going to do the same thing with the second side of the channel. Now, if there's a little bit of a gap when we sew this together, that's totally fine because your drawstring does need to come out and go back in on these ends, so it doesn't have to match absolutely perfectly. And next we are going to sew on both sides about 1/8 inch from that edge to create our drawstring channel. And when you get to where they match, go back and forth twice just to reinforce that section because that's where your drawstring might put a little bit more pressure. All we have to do is put the drawstring in and then decide what kind of gift is going to go in there. So I'm going to take my 2 ribbons that are 22 inches long each. We're going to do an experiment. This one, I have put the nail polish on ahead of time before putting it through the channel. And this one, I have not. So let's see if it makes a difference. So I'm going to put your pin, and then you're just going to start on one side. Let me know in the comments what kind of material you like to use for drawstrings. Then you're just going to pull that out when you get back to the same side. So pushing that ribbon through without it having any kind of fray check or nail polish made it a bit messed up. Line these up and put a little knot because I want my bag to be able to open all the way before it hits that knot. So I am going to put this nail polish on there. You need to trim any pieces that are kind of flying off like that. Then I'm just going to hit it with this nail polish so that it doesn't keep fraying. And these, I already put the nail polish on and I let it dry. So we're going to now do the same thing, put it all the way around, but you're going to start from the opposite side of the one you did before. Okay, well, I think we have a winner chicken dinner. You definitely want to put fray check or nail polish on before you put it through your drawstring channel. Now I'm just going to knot that side. Look at how cute that is. So let's look at the other one that is the opposite. Super cute set. Which do you like better? Let me know in the comments. And if you make any of these, I would love to see them. I'd love to see what fabrics you pick. These bags are now 9 inches by 7 inches with a 2-inch bottom. So you could fit lots of stuff in there just for storage, for a gift, or whatever.
In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to take a 6-inch quilt block and turn it into a wine bottle holder with a drawstring. So cute. Enough of me talking about it. Let's make it. As always, first things first, let's talk about our supplies. As I mentioned, we're going to be making a wine bottle holder that uses one of your 6-inch quilt blocks. It's actually 6.5 by 6.5 before you sew it into anything. Maybe you did it just to practice or for fun. I have a bunch of these laying around, and I thought this cute little house one that I designed would be perfect for a hostess gift, to give wine and a little gift to a new neighbor, etc. I'm going to do red on the top and the bottom of the block to make the front. And then I'm just going to do solid red on the back. Now on this one that I showed you, because I used a different color roof to the base, I decided to match the top with the roof and the base with the house. You can totally do whatever you want. But then I also decided that I wanted this to look like a band of green around the top. So instead of doing one piece, I did the 2-piece. And that's all detailed, different options in the written pattern that you can find in my Etsy shop. So that is going to be the front. So this one, 6.5 inches wide, 5 1/4 high, also 5 1/4 high. This is 6.5 inches square, unfinished, meaning not sewn into anything. The back is going to be 6.5 inches wide by 16 inches high. Then you're going to need 2 pieces for the lining. I used my same little Hush Hush print from a Riley Blake collection that I used on the front, so that will coordinate when the little bit that you can see. I'm going to use this cute little 1.5 inch ruler to mark and cut out the boxed corners. You can use any size, but I love that it's the perfect size. Then I have to think less. I just got one of these threader tools. I'm absolutely in love with it. So much faster than using a safety pin to thread things. And I'm going to use Rick Rack from my drawstrings. And then this is one of my new tool loves. It is a wool pressing bar and a clapper all in one. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. And it makes pressing the seams open on bags like this a dream. So I can't wait to show you how that works. Now, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to right sides together. So the top onto that block and then the bottom onto that block. And then I'm going to press the seams towards the red. I'm going to use a leader fabric, which is just a scrap of fabric. And I usually use this when I'm starting off the end of a project because it's a lazy, quick way to do it. Now it's a smart way to do it. Okay, so I just start on that fabric and I don't worry about it because any bird's nest will end up there. And then when I get to my project, I go forward and back a little bit to knot. Now I'm going to cut that off and then we can turn it into an ender by just sewing onto that again. Since I'm not making a bunch of these at once, I can't really daisy chain, but this basically makes it so you are daisy chaining by using a scrap piece of fabric. So I've sewn the top on there. I'm just going to flip it up. I'm going to do all of my ironing at once. Then I'm going to put this right sides together and sew the bottom on. So now, magic presto changeo, my ender has become a leader again. Now to make the lining, we're going to put these 2 rectangles right sides together. I'm just going to take a pencil and I'm going to draw 1.5 inch on each corner. So we're making boxed corners and we're going to use the method where we cut the box out before we sew it together. With box corners, you're doing work at the beginning or at the end. So if you don't take the time to draw like this, then you're going to be taking a little bit more time creating the point and figuring out where to sew across to make that corner. So for these, I'm just going to do this. And you can save these little squares, use them for something else. I'm going to grab my clips and just clip this together. Now, because this is the lining, we need to leave a few inches open, and I usually do it on a bottom side. So I'll just start at that mark, put a clip there, and then I'm going to do my 2 clip trick for where to end, because sometimes I forget, I go all the way, then I have to get the seam ripper out, and I got to re-knot, and you know, who needs that? 2 clips means, Tara, pay attention, get ready to stop sewing. Now we've turned this piece into the block and this, and it matches. So it is 6.5 inches by 16. We're going to put these right sides together and we are going to clip 1.5 inches out of the bottom corner. So make sure you have the bottom and the top correct and you're not cutting out of the top of your bag. For the outside, we don't have to leave a space open for turning. We're going to sew all the way on both of these sides and across the bottom. We just need to clip or pin and hold this all in place so that it doesn't shift while we're sewing. Now we have the outside and the inside ready, back to the sewing machine. So I sewed the 3 sides of the outside and forgot to hit record, whoopsie. So now I'm just going to do the same thing. Luckily they were just straight lines, so it really, you know how to do that. But we'll do it on the lining. We're going to use the leader fabric and do 1/4 inch seams. And you know what these two clips means? That means we're going to stop soon to leave a space open for turning. Now I'm going to show you 2 ways to sew these corners. This way is the way most people would do it. You would stop because you don't want to sew this part. You're just sewing these straight parts. So you would stop, you would end, and then you would start again and go across this short part. Now I'm going to show you the second way, and I can't remember who I saw do this. I saw this on Instagram, but it's pretty genius. You're going to leave your needle down, pick your foot up, and then you're just going to fold your fabric and twist it, and then just keep sewing. So now we have the outside and the lining all sewn together, and we're going to press these seams open with this 12-inch wool pressing bar with clapper. So what I love about this is if you have something that is small enough to go around it, it makes pressing these seams so easy. Because before I had this, I would either flatten it and then I would be pressing the edges a little bit, or I had a tailor's ham. I had this that I would use, which worked pretty well, but they haven't had this on Amazon for a couple of years. So I had no way to tell you where to get one. And I like to use tools that are available to everyone if you decide it looks like something that you want as well. So anyway, you just lay this flat and then open that and press that seam. A little trickier here when I got to the block. And this is 12 inches long, so it can do most of it in one fell swoop. And then I'm just going to push it down a little bit more to get the rest. So this thing is going to be so handy for all kinds of bags where it was just awkward before to get this pressed. Now, obviously, we're not going to be able to get it right inside there. It's a little too big to go into our little corners, but what I do is I just sit it up on there and do the best I can. You could also use a smaller iron, but see, I didn't end up making any weird creases anywhere else. So love how that works. And now we're just going to do the same thing with the lining. I was trying to do it like a left-hander. My mom and dad would be so proud. My mom was always glad that we didn't end up left-handed because she found it to be difficult. And I think my dad was always a little bit disappointed that none of his kids or grandkids ended up as lefties. So now I'm pressing the side of the lining where we left the opening. You can see it right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press there to the opening. Then I'm going to move the bar down, and I'm going to open that with my fingers, and I'm just going to kind of pull and then finger press that so it looks like it's sewn, but we're just pressing that. That will make it easier to close later. All right, your work is done, little guy. Our next step is to make these boxed corners. And this is where it's going to be super easy because we took the time to cut the squares out in the first place. You're just going to open them up, match these seams, and put a clip. And then we're just going to sew straight across with a 1/4 inch seam. Now, the way to know how big this box bottom is going to be is you just double the size that you cut out. So because we cut out a 1.5 inch square, it's going to be 3 inches across the bottom. You can see on this finished one that I did the same way, 1, 2, 3. So that's how big that's going to be. All right, now we're going to go sew those, and then we will come back and put these together. And you probably guessed it, we're going to start with our leader fabric, and then we're just going to daisy chain across all of these box corners. So I'll do lining, front, lining, front. I'm going to use my scissors to make sure that stays flat under the presser foot. I'm going to cut off the lining and cut off that leader fabric. And then we're going to do the second bottom on the lining. Now our sides are sewn and pressed. Our box bottoms are done. So okay, I'm going to take the outside bag and I'm going to turn that one right side out. Any threads, kind of push out those corners just with my fingers. And then I'm going to put it inside the lining, matching the seams and the boxed bottoms. So you don't have to worry about being really precise down here because it's up here that we're going to be sewing and where we have to be really particular. So just get it in there and then come up here and make sure you're matching these seams. That's what I always clip first, because when you get those seams lined up, the rest should just fall into place. See how that everything just kind of lined itself up? And because we left an opening in the lining, we're going to sew all the way around. We don't have to leave any opening along the top, so there's not going to be any awkward place at the top of your bag. So now I'm just going to sew all the way around, and then we're going to flip it right side out and sew that up and make our drawstring channel. If you have a sewing machine where you can take a bunch off, make it small so that this can loop around it, you're going to want to do that, and then you would be sewing from the top. Mine is more of an industrial machine. It does not come apart, So when I do things like this, I sew from the inside. So you just do whatever is the easiest on your sewing machine. Now we're going to just sew all the way around with a 1/4 inch seam. The next step is to find the opening in the lining and pull the bag through and turn everything right side out. It's going to be in 2 parts. Threads everywhere. Now, if you really want to, you could hand stitch that opening together, but it's going to be at the bottom of a wine bag, so I am not going to do that. I'm going to put a little pin there so I know when I need to stop. So I'm just going to make sure that's lined up really well and just sew real close. And I could have used clips, but I left them over at my sewing machine, so we're going to pin this part in case you thought there was a reason I grabbed pins. Now I'm going to make sure these edges are lined up really well and just sew really close to the edge. All right, so that opening is closed. Back to the ironing board. Now it is time to put the lining inside the bag. So you're just going to open that, push that in. And I do try and get it kind of lined up well. We're not going to be sewing down there or anything, but look how cute it's turning out. And then we just want to get this top edge so that the seam is on the top. We don't want the red showing on the inside. We don't want the white really showing on the outside. So just take a minute to get that lined up nicely. And then you're just going to press that in place. Now, because we sewed all the way around, you don't have to sew and top stitch up here if you don't want to. It's totally personal choice. Now, when I was ironing, I told you that I would show you the difference between top stitching or not. So on this one, you can see I did sew around the top, and on this one, I did not. Honestly, not a huge difference in one versus the other. I think I would opt for not doing it because it's just one less step and I can get that made. So let me know what you think. Would you prefer to do that top stitching on that edge or just leave it pressed and assume it's all going to be good? This isn't something that goes through the wash a lot, so it will probably be just fine. Our next step is to mark the 2 places where we are going to sew to make our drawstring channel. And you'll notice you can barely see it because I like to make it subtle, so I always match the thread to the fabric. Now, this is the same thing with the sewing machine. So because I have to sew from the inside, I'm going to have white as my top thread and a red that matches as my bobbin. But if you can remove yours and you can have it like this on your sewing machine and you're sewing from the top, then you're going to have your outer color as your top thread and your inner color as your bobbin. If you can do that, you're going to do your markings on the outside. I'm going to do my markings on the inside. Hopefully that's not confusing. It basically, you want to mark on the space that you're going to see as you're sewing. And that is the only reason I'm turning this inside out again. Okay, so I'm going to get that nice and flat. And I'm going to line that up on a line of my mat because we are going to draw a line 2 inches down from the top. You can use a chalk line, a heat erasable pen. I'm just going to use this pencil. And then another one 3/4 of an inch from there. So basically at 2 3/4. I'm going to turn it over and do the same lines on the other side. Now, usually that's enough because, you know, it's not a huge area that you're not going to see it less than an inch. But if you feel more comfortable, you can connect these lines as well. So you can just fold it like that and make sure that line goes all the way. So now we're going to take this back and we're going to sew all the way around on those 2 lines. Now, because you might see this thread, and I definitely would because my bobbin is on the outside, I'm going to pull up the bobbin threads as I sew both of these stitch lines. Now I'm just going to move it over and do the second line. This is where having a machine that you can fit this around is a little bit easier, but I do love this machine, so it's worth it. So in the written tutorial that you can get on my Etsy shop, I am going to include the directions for how to make this cute little house, as well as 2 other quilt blocks in the 6-inch size that you can put in here. And then also give you all the measurements for if you want to do a solid color, 2 colors, or even 3 colors on the back. You can click the link and check that out. All we have left to do is put in the drawstrings, and we're going to have 2 so that you pull on both sides to tighten that like that. I'm going to use this threader that is called that purple thing. I'm not exactly sure why, but it is awesome. I bought a set of 5. I think it was under $10. I don't know. I guess I'm planning on doing drawstrings with a group at some point, or if I lose them, I'll have more. So we have 2 pieces of whatever you want to use for your drawstring that are 20 inches long. If you don't have this, you can use a regular safety pin or a quilting safety pin, which is a little bit longer to do that. Now, what we need to do is we need to open each side of the drawstring channel because right now it is sewn completely shut. So you want to be really, really careful, and you want to take a seam ripper. I love this one. It's Cindy's seam ripper. I love how it just fits on your finger. So you're not trying to hold stuff and do stuff. I really like it. So you're going to really, really carefully just pick out the threads in the red. So in whatever your top layer is, in between the 2 stitch lines. So as you can see, the lining is still intact. We don't want to open the lining. We just want to open this outer. And we're going to do that on both sides. So now we have our opening. Now you're going to take your drawstring and you're going to put it through that little hole, just a couple inches. And then you'll see this is curved. I find it easier to do on this if we do the curve facing towards the fabric instead of facing up. So I'm just going to put that in until it comes out the other side. It might get caught a teeny bit on the seam allowance, but this is so fast. Don't pull it all the way through, leave a few inches over here. Then we're going to do the same thing until we get it back to where it started. And this thing would be great for elastic, for drawstrings, obviously. Anything that you have to thread through something else, this is a dream. Okay, so then I like to even the ends and then pull. And then make sure that is flat, and then just tie it in a knot. And you can tie the knot pretty close to the bag because you just need to make sure the bag can go flat for putting things in and out, but you'll see how long they become when you cinch it tight. So now we're just going to do the same exact thing, but we're going to start on the opposite side. Let me know in the comments what you think, if you're going to give this a try, and who you're going to give it to. So what do you think? Which one are you going to try first? Are you doing these for Valentine's Day, just for a special occasion, or just because? I would love to know. Leave me a comment and let me know what you think and what you're working on. Happy sewing!